All right, this is going to be a fairly short video because this is really straightforward. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you have the Visual Studio Code ESLint plugin installed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P to open up my command palette. I'm going to do ext install for install extensions and hit enter. And this is going to move us to the extensions window. And then inside of this, I'm going to say ESLint and hit enter. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up this plugin, ESLint, that integrates ESLint with Visual Studio Code. So make sure you install it. I already have it installed. Now, this brings me to what I was going to say earlier about why I have a global install of ESLint. To install a global copy of ESLint, in fact, I'll go ahead and update mine. I'll do npm install -g ESLint. And what that'll do is it'll install a global copy of ESLint to our system. And when you use the ESLint plugin for Visual Studio, it's important to have it installed globally so that when you open up individual JavaScript files on your system that aren't a part of a project, the ESLint plugin will still work appropriately. So that way, just when you open up random JavaScript files, you will still get ESLint working. But if you don't, then it won't work unless you install a local copy. But if you do have a local copy, it will prefer that. So yeah, the next thing we got to do is disable Visual Studio Code's own error reporting service, because that is going to conflict with ESLint. Notice how when I hover over this, it says JS property assignment expected. And that's because Visual Studio Code's own little thing, its own little validation, is processing this file. We got to disable that so that we control the validation based off of our ESLint.rc.json file and not through the Visual Studio Code default. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt to show my menu bar. By the way, if you don't like seeing your menu bar, which I generally don't like, you can always go to, I think it's, I found this once, and I was like super stoked about it because I hate looking at the menu bar, but now I can't find it. Oh, there we go, toggle menu bar. If you don't want that menu bar, just go to View and say Toggle Menu Bar, and then we can just hit the Alt key to bring up the menu bar. So I recommend doing that. What we're going to do is we're going to go to File, Preferences, and we're going to set workspace settings. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a folder called .vscode in our workspace. And it's going to then create a file under it called settings.json. Then it's going to open up two files, the settings.json that's local to our project, as well as the default settings. So you can look at all the settings in Visual Studio Code and just kind of get an idea of the things that you can change. And what I'm going to do is in my local settings is I'm going to say javascript.validate.enable and set that to false. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart Visual Studio Code. So make sure you didn't have to restart it when you enabled that admin, but that extension. But I'm going to go ahead and restart it because generally speaking, when you make changes to the ESLint configuration, all that stuff, Visual Studio Code sometimes picks up on it, sometimes doesn't. I think in the past it used to not pick up on those changes until you restarted, and I think now it tries to pick up those changes while you're still going so you can keep your files open and everything. But just as a general rule of thumb, since it's so quick to close and open again, I'm just going to close it completely, come back over to my console, type in code dot, and it popped into a different monitor, and bring it back. So with that, I should be able to go to server.js, and you'll see I don't get that error. But notice how I do get my local ESLint. Notice how when I delete this console.log that references app component, check that out. App component is now being hovered over, and we see ESLint says app component is defined and never used. If I take away this semicolon right here, I get an error saying ESLint missing semicolon. If I try to reference a variable that doesn't exist, I get an error saying doesn't exist is not defined. So now you can see, we see the output of our ESLint right in our editor. It's a fantastic way to ensure the quality of your code. And I highly recommend that people practice this. So, and it'll also handle indentation rules like that. And again, most importantly, it will understand our new features of JavaScript that aren't yet necessarily part of the standard. And I think this is a fantastic, incredibly flexible way to write code in Visual Studio Code. And I know that there are ESLint plugins for pretty much any editor that you might be using. If you're using Sublime or Atom or whatever that other one that was made by Adobe. Whatever editor you're using, it should support an ESLint plugin. And the ESLint plugin should pull from your local configuration. And that keeps our compilation step, which is going to be using ESLint to ensure code quality and actually prevent compilation in the case of a violation of our quality rules. It ensures that is in sync with what we have going on in our editor. Anyway, I mean, that's really about it. You just got to install ESLint, the ESLint plugin for Visual Studio Code, and you've got to disable JavaScript validation. And presumably, you could also disable JavaScript validation by default everywhere, since this is a plugin that'll be available to everything, and my ESLint is globally installed. But I wanted to show you guys how to add that settings.json in here. So you can see an example of me doing workspace-specific changes to the Visual Studio Code configuration. But with that, I mean, that pretty much wraps up ESLint. And I know, it's been a little bit of time that took to get this going, but I can't stress how important this is enough. It will ensure your code quality, throw out errors before you even leave your editor, that errors that are the most common problems that you might face, the most common mistakes that you might make. And with that, I think we're ready to move on. I'll see you guys in the next video.